Hey everyone, welcome to the SeattleMobile.net user group. I'm super excited to test out some new technology. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe and healthy wherever you're at. John and I have been experimenting with a bunch of different streaming technologies, figuring out what's good for user groups. So we're giving the Teams live event a look and feel. So the SeattleMobile.net user group, we've been going on for quite a few years. Me and my good friend Frank Kruger started it, oh my goodness, 4 or 5 years ago. And since then, we've been meeting up almost every single month or so in either Seattle or Redmond to talk on different Xamarin and .NET related activities. So we were trying to think of a way coming out of January, February to kind of reignite with the user group as much as we could. So we were trying to figure out some good ways, and John and I, we spent some time to research what's the best way to do a user group. Do we just go live on Twitch? Do we do a Zoom call? Do we do a Skype call? Like, what's the best way to interact with people? And so we've been trying out this Teams live event, which is kind of cool because it's like a live broadcast. Behind the scenes, there's actually a bunch of really cool technology going on, so I can kind of produce the show. You can see me. John's actually like on hold backstage, if you will, right now, which is kind of cool. And it's quite fun. So we're all hunkering down, staying safe. I hope you are too. John has a bunch of cool stuff to talk about today when it comes to Visual Studio for Mac, specifically for .NET developers, the whole gambit of everything that's new. And I think it's been quite a long time since we've talked about what's new in Visual Studio for Mac. So maybe you read some blogs, maybe you're just interested, maybe you're a Xamarin developer, maybe you're not, but you're here. I appreciate it. Now, if you're using Teams or Teams in the browser, or you're just on, you should have a little like live Q&A question section over there. So there's no live chat necessarily, but there is a Q&A. I will be monitoring it, and John can also monitor as well, but I'll be kind of poking in if there's questions along the way, just very similar to as if you were to have raised your hands, which is very, very cool. This thing will be recorded. I'm not exactly sure how it's recorded yet, so we'll try to put it on YouTube or something like that later and send it out if you miss it, but I can't guarantee it because I don't actually know. This is the first time of us doing it, so we're not actually 100% sure, which is cool. So we've been trying to meet up the first or second Wednesday of every month, so that's why we're doing it now. And in the user group usually goes like an hour or so, hour and a half, a little bit longer when we're in person. So we always open up with a little announcements though, and these are quite fun. So if you've come to our SeattleMobile.net user group, you know that I'm James Montemagno, and I'm a program manager here at Microsoft. And I oversee mobile development with Xamarin across all the different aspects of Mac, PC, iOS, Android, everything like that. Been in the community for a long, long time and been running the user group for a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. So if you are in the Seattle Redmond area, like I said, we meet up about once a month. We're going to be doing some virtual ones going forward. So if you're not in Seattle Redmond, feel free to come and hang out. We talk about all sorts of stuff: .NET development, C#, F#, iOS, Android, Mac development with Xamarin, Windows development, and even game development. So really, we try to cover all sorts of different technology because really, if it's something in the .NET space, it probably has to do with mobile too, which is why I'm excited to have John talk about all the .NET-y goodness that's happening on the Mac. And I've been spending quite a lot of time on the Mac recently, so it's quite fun to take a look at what's new. Now, some announcements before we go into John's presentation. I always like to kind of go over, hey, what's new in the last month or two, and quite a lot has happened since we did the last user group. So a few things happened, and I don't want to take too much thunder from John, so I won't go too deep into it. I'll just talk a little bit of Xamarin bits. But both Visual Studio 2019 16.5 and Visual Studio for Mac 2019 8.5, those are the version numbers, were both released, and they have tons of goodies inside of them for Xamarin developers specifically. The first is Hot Reload. Hot Reload we talked about many times before at the user group, enabling you to write a little bit of code, set different properties, have it update in real time. The team has actually expanded this to now actually do multi-deploy on both Windows and PC, so you can deploy to iOS and Android at the same time and have it update, which is really, really cool. I'm sure John will go through this a little bit more. I'm stealing a little bit of his thunder. But this is really cool because it enables you to really iterate faster on your application, which I think is absolutely delightful, and I've been using it quite a bit. On the flip side, we also released something called Android Startup Tracing. And I think sometime last year at one of the meetups, I went over this little magical checkbox of startup tracing. And what the team has done is enable startup tracing for everyone. And this is the ability for any Android application to basically boot faster, just in general, just start faster, but have less impact of a full ahead of time compilation. So what you see on this little chart and graph is sort of the release mode that it's in, the APK size, so how big the app is, and then how long it took for this really, really large application to start. This is our smart hotel application. So this isn't file new. This is like a big, big application. And in normal release mode on this older device took about 5 seconds and it was about 50 megs. Full ahead of time compilation really brings down that time, but it really makes your app a lot bigger. It doubles your app size. So that's where startup tracing came in, that third column there. And what's cool about that, it was just a checkbox, and basically the team built these profiles for both Xamarin Forms and just Xamarin Android apps. And that was good because it was sort of like the sweet spot in the middle. You had, starter fast uptime, but then just a little bit bump in your APK size. Now what the team has done is enabled you to create a special profile for your application. So you run a little command line, it pumps out a file config for you, and boom, your application starts actually as fast, the absolute fastest of all of them, which is absolutely crazy, with the really very small impact on your APK. So here we're seeing that it's just a few megabytes larger than the normal startup tracing, but it's nearly half the startup time, which is awesome. And that's available for everybody. So every single edition, including Community Edition. We also announced Hot Restart, and this is actually shipping under a feature flag. So it's a little preview feature flag inside of Visual Studio on Windows. And Hot Restart is a really cool technology that enables you to rapidly iterate on your applications when you change your source code. And one of the side effects of how this works by deploying and sort of interpreting your application source code is it actually enables you to just plug your iOS device into your Windows machine and just hit debug. So you can just go and deploy right to your device with nothing in between, just over USB, and you're done. And what's cool about this is that the side effect of being awesome that you can just plug in your device into your machine, like my Surface Book here, is that it also cuts down on your initial build times because it only has to do a minimum build. It's not building an entire package for development. And it cuts down your incremental builds and your incremental deploys. So you can start deploying and debugging your applications in like under, under a minute. And then every change after that, just 10 seconds to actually stop and restart and redeploy your application. It's super awesome. It's under a feature flag, so definitely give it a look on Visual Studio 2019 on Windows. A few other things that happened in the world of Xamarin in the last few months, and since we've talked, actually, is Xamarin Forms 4.5 was released into stable, and 4.6 is actually just about to come out too. But there's tons of shell updates, carousel view, collection view, swipe view that you're seeing in here. My new favorite is custom embedded fonts that we just did a great blog post on it. You can add a font, a custom font, in one line of code. You just do an assembly export, you add it as an assembly resource or embedded resource, and it handles everything for you. It's so cool. All sorts of other stuff in there, some optimizations, some small ones for picker options, things like that. And they also introduced under preview feature flag the media element, which is what you're seeing right there in the bottom middle, which is actually a dual screen for the Surface Duo application, the Xamarin TV application, full audio and video playback. So super duper cool, really enabling developers to build some awesome stuff for their apps. Now, I wouldn't be me if I wasn't talking about Xamarin Essentials, my favorite library ever. And then because I happen to be the program manager for it and work with an amazing dev team on it. 1.5 just came out a few weeks ago. It shipped actually with Xamarin Forms 4.5. It paired up very nicely because they were both based on Android X instead of the Android support libraries. But it added a bunch of stuff in there, so like a theme detection, permissions, more platform extensions. and a full cross-platform web authenticator, so you can do OAuth sign-in from a single line of code. And that's really cool in your mobile app. And then you can easily add that backend to an ASP.NET Core application, which is really, really awesome. Oh, that's a cool animation. I don't know what it did. Finally, one thing I want to mention here is that a few weeks ago, we had .NET Conf focus on Xamarin. .NET Conf is a big event in September, usually across all .NET workloads. And what the .NET team has been doing is doing these smaller focus events. So this has been really cool because it's a dedicated day to a dedicated technology. So we had 14 sessions from speakers all across the globe give presentations. This was right before everyone was remote besides me and Olia, who were in the studio. It was one of the last days that we could get in. We stayed very, very far apart from each other the entire day. And there was a glass wall between us and the entire production crew. So it was a very different type of .NET Conf, but it went off spectacular using Teams and getting everything done. I was really blown away at how awesome it was, and amazing speakers too. Now there's 9 hours of awesome Xamarin content available for you, and all the presentation slide decks, all the source code links, all the video links are at that aka.ms. So if you want to snapshot that right now, go for it, aka.ms/Xamarin-focus-2020, and that'll bring you to everywhere you need to go, including some awesome keynotes. I mean, sessions on just absolutely everything that you can think about. My favorite was Barty, who literally quit his job to become a full-time Xamarin developer, has made award-winning applications for Android. And his entire session was kind of a little bit of a story about how to market, produce, monetize your application. So it was really fun. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I continuously learn something new from every single session. So it's quite delightful. And without further ado, I should say, I told him I was only going to go 5 or 6 minutes. So I kind of went 10 minutes, I guess. I'm going to go ahead and get my good friend John Galloway up here and see if I can figure out how to use this thing. So let's see if I can get this going. So it's pretty cool. I should be able to tap on that.
I think I can request control.
No, you just need to say share.
Share thing. I'm sorry for requesting that control. Okay, share. Yes, I want to share. I'm a sharing person.
Denying your request.
All right, I'm sharing. I don't know what you see. Oh, now it says I'm going to share my whole desktop.
Yes.
So why not?
Oh, there we go. And then there we go. Tap on that. Tap on that. Please hold. Send live. And 4, 3, 2, and without further ado, my good friend John Galloway, and of course, I will be monitoring the Q&A, so feel free at any time to pop in there and ask some questions, and I'll break in if I need to. So yeah, you should be good to go, John.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to be talking about what's new in Visual Studio for Mac. I'm going to start by just kind of overviewing, what it is, what we're building, and why, in the timeline. And then we'll talk about what we've recently shipped, and then some kind of stuff that's in the works. Kind of our thinking about Visual Studio for Mac and, why we're even building it is, development is complex. There's a lot that you have to do, that I have to do as a developer. There's a lot to keep up with. And this is an area where, having a lightweight code editor like VS Code is sometimes good, but having a full IDE that you can actually, has designers, has templates and things like that you can kind of live in for 40 hours a week or whatever, is a place where we really feel like we can help out. So this is kind of our sort of focus and how Visual Studio for Mac fits into the whole kind of portfolio of what we're working on, right? So you've got under developer tools, you've got the Visual Studio family, and then under developer services, you've got, GitHub, Azure DevOps, App Center, and then the cloud platform, of course, Azure. So the whole idea is that it's, we're looking at things as a whole and trying to build a whole story for you as a developer to get your work done, focus on the code, focus on the features. Visual Studio for Mac overall, this is how we kind of see it as a development environment, making things easier for you. For instance, things like editor config. So being able to set rules and policies for how you want your code to look. You make your decision once and for all, whether your team goes tabs or spaces, you set it in your editor config. you can actually check that into your repo, and that's shared across. Editor config is pretty cool too because it's a standard. So it works across, it's, you know, if you're using Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio and somebody else you know is using Vim or whatever, it's still going to work across that. So, so let me see. I've got a lot of slides. I want to go faster. So, some things we look at too is
take your time, John. It's okay.
All
It's
okay. You know, it's really cool that you can customize it. So I really like getting into the custom themes. I use, you know, I like to use like a dark theme. One I've been liking lately is Dracula. You know, there's a lot you can do there. Support for custom fonts. So like I'm using a font today with support for ligatures. I'll be showing the terminal, and the terminal you can use Powerline fonts. So you can really customize your experience. And then also things like, you know, integrating more deeply in with the operating system as well. So support for things like keychain for signing in. One other thing, you know, for people that jump between different things, like we talked to some developers that are mostly used to Visual Studio for Windows, and then when they hop over to Visual Studio Code, they get a little disoriented. And there are things, as you set it up, there's a prompt, it's shown in the bottom there, which keyboard shortcuts do you prefer? And you can actually pick ones that are aligned with Visual Studio for Windows. And you can bring that up also later, you can bring that up in the preferences. All right, let's talk about what we've been doing. So looking at the timeline over the past year, we really, you know, made some efforts to look at making Visual Studio Code a premier .NET editing environment. So a premier environment for getting work done for .NET Core applications. So one of the ways we started on that was in 8.1 with a native C# editor. So before the editor was built using GTK and it wasn't fully integrated, it also had its own custom code. And what the team did here, I think, is actually pretty remarkable from an engineering point of view. They actually made it more integrated in with Visual Studio or with Mac OS by, you know, building native Cocoa controls. So that gives you support for things like accessibility, you know, just better overall performance and stability. But at the same time that they made it more integrated and, you know, native Mac OS, they actually did this with code that's shared with Visual Studio for Windows. So we're actually sharing most of the code in the C# editor with Visual Studio for Windows. And of course, as you know, anytime Microsoft is sharing code between groups, that's good for us and it's good for you. It's good for us because we're not duplicating effort, we're not solving the same bugs twice, all that stuff. It's also good for you because you get features faster and you don't have to hit the bugs twice. And so it's just kind of better for everybody. So that was big focus with 8.1. 8.2, focus on startup performance and more C# editor enhancements. So we definitely, you know, we monitor and listen to, you know, feedback on things, and performance we know is really important to people. And so that's, you know, application startup performance is really important. So 8.3, that hit during .NET Conf in September. In some ways it seems recent, and others it seems a lifetime ago, but that's when .NET Core 3.0 dropped, and also C# 8. So really important for us to support the features when they land. You know, when the SDKs drop, when the language drop, we of course want to be there right when it ships, and so those were the major things there. 8.4 just hit in January. A lot of stuff. This was a big release. So support for .NET Core 3.1. .NET Core 3.1, of course, is an important release because it's an LTS release. So .NET Core has gone to a predictable release schedule. For a while, we were just throwing them at you whenever we thought they were done. And we're really focusing now on a very predictable schedule. So .NET Core 3.1 LTS, that's a 2-year support. And then after that, we alternate going forward. So the next is going to be .NET 5, and that's coming in in this coming November, and then .NET 6 the following year will be an LTS. So we've kind of made that commitment going forward that that's our release schedule. Other things, server-side Blazor. I'm really excited about that. So server-side, so Blazor is being developed now. The WASM, the client-side Blazor, is going to ship in May, and we're going to support that when that releases. Server-side, we ship that support in December. So that includes the editor, the templates, and everything, and I'll show you more of that later. Razor editor support. Razor files are important for not just Blazor applications, but also in Razor components, which can be used inside of ASP.NET Core Razor Pages apps. Also support for ASP.NET Core templates with authentication, and I think and also scaffolding. And I think this is an area where the experience compared to, like, say, an editor like VS Code is pretty different. As part of the experience, or as part of the shipping these, I worked with Syed, the PM, on these to update the tutorials, right? The getting started tutorials. And there was a lot that we were able to remove, a lot of manual typing, and we could replace with a screenshot instead of go get these NuGet packages, now run this command, now do the scaffolding thing from the command line. If you miss something, you'll get this error and all that. It's like, forget it. Just use the project template. We'll set it up, including authentication, and then we'll set up scaffolding for you. If you love typing, you still can, but you don't have to. And then also included worker service template and XAML hot reload for Xamarin, as James mentioned earlier. Okay, 8.5 just shipped. So I forget the exact day, but that was quite recent. Was it the 8th? April 8th, I think. Last Wednesday-ish. So there's only two kind of features to call out here. The SPA templates with authentication, that's React and Angular. And then also, so those templates include authentication, which is pretty nice. And then also support for Azure Functions v3. One thing that you don't see here is that we did some significant work as we're moving things around internally from an engineering perspective. So consolidating repositories, building more advanced deployment pipelines and things like that. And what that does is it allows for more automated testing and kind of remove some technical debt as far as having things split amongst a bunch of different repositories. So that's the one that's just shipped. And then the next one on the way is 8.6. So 8.6 has some really cool features: Blazor WebAssembly support, gRPC support, and open API as well, and then integrated terminal. And those are things I'm going to dig into more in a bit. And then I've included the link here. If you just search for Visual Studio Mac roadmap, you'll get that. And that's where we work to, I'll prove myself right or wrong. Roadmap, right? So we work to put these out here, and then also in cases where we can actually like click throughs on here's what we're building. And we'll link also to the things where you can kind of vote for them and on dev community. So this is where you can see what's in the works. We don't want to, we've moved from the time where we would try and surprise you with, hey, here's a neat feature, and you say, I didn't want that feature. Why didn't you fix the bugs that I cared about, right? So we're really trying to be really upfront and tell you what we're doing. So you can see all these, as we're working on building them, you can see what's in the releases. Cool. All right. And then just kind of overall wrapping some things up, we do know performance and reliability is important. We also know that that's a common pain point, and it's absolutely something that we are looking at. So we have done a decent amount of work here. Cut hangs. We watch for unhealthy sessions. Those include both hangs and UI delays, significant UI delays. And then we've made some big improvements on things like context menu and IntelliSense. But we know there's definitely more work to do, both in performance and reliability. And I was just in several meetings with the PM team this week, and we're working on, really kind of focusing on that in depth over the next few months and making sure to continue to make this better. One way that you can help out is as you're using Visual Studio for Mac, if you get a bug, you can log an issue directly from within Visual Studio for Mac, and you have the option to include your logs, and that'll tell us, sometimes like down to the actual line of code or what you were working on when the issue hit. So definitely, if you can file an issue from within Visual Studio for Mac, that's the best. But also just go over to developer community. So if we go, there's this Visual Studio for Mac, and you can go in and you can mark things off. So this definitely, this is where we look at things like integrated terminal. That was how we were able to make the case for this is something we want to get included. So as you vote things up or down, for instance, one that we've started to look more at lately is touch bar support. And when I first joined the team, I was like, hey, why don't we have a touch bar and touch bar support? And people were like, yeah, people aren't really asking for it. And over time, these votes have started to continue to come in. And now the team's looking at writing up more specs on it and stuff. So this is where the features are that we're tracking. And then problems, this is where you go in and actually, if you get a bug, if you get a hang or a crash and you file them, this helps us to monitor that. So, all right, so I've already kind of covered some of the things of, what we think of the product reason, why does VS for Mac exist, and what do we want to make, what do we look at as values? So definitely you have an option of using a VM and using Visual Studio for Windows. And there are some trade-offs to that. One is definitely the performance of a virtual machine is never going to be as good. And another is it really impacts your battery life. And then I think another thing that is just there's some developer friction and mental load of copying files back and forth from the VM to Mac OS, and it's just more disjointed. So really the idea here is to have just an app on your desktop that does what you want. Another thing is native Mac OS look and feel and integration with Mac OS. And so that includes things like integrating with accessibility. We've done some work recently where if you set high contrast mode, it's just automatically going to work in VS for Mac. So really just making it making it an integrated experience that feels good to work with on a Mac. Another thing is a full IDE experience. So, as opposed to something like VS Code, which, hey, we make it, we're happy for you to use it. But when you do use VS Code, it's less of a full IDE. So that means you don't have the designer support. You don't have the templating and scaffolding and deeper debugging and all that kind of stuff. One thing we've also been looking at more recently, really as a deeper focus, is just .NET Core as a workload. So especially as things move forward with moving towards .NET 5 and kind of how the whole holistic story of .NET 5 being a tool for all platforms is shaping up. That's really kind of a focus. So for instance, ASP.NET Core and Blazor and .NET Core libraries and things, those are something where we really feel like we can provide a really good experience for you. I've been talking really fast. Do we have any questions yet, James?
Yeah, so we have a few questions in the chat. I'm not sure how much exactly apply, but we have a few here. So let me go through a few really quick here. The first was Simon asked if there's any diff capabilities, diff file 1, file 2 type of thing in VS for Mac.
So there is support for through the source control. So in source control, so files that are tracked in source control, I'm not sure here what I've got that I've actually changed. This isn't a good project, but you do have support for that inside of there. Let me take one that I think has a better, this maybe does. So in that, it's kind of a pretty view, but it's not like if you want to do something like a three-way merge diff or something like that, it's not quite that advanced. And we do tell people for those scenarios, I actually don't think, so if I go in, so there's changes here. So this is a diff, but this is just a fully added.
So once you put it into Git, basically, and then you do changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even mean I don't even have to have checked it in somewhere. I think I have one that's will look better. There's this Blazor match game. Don't care. So it just needs to be a Git repo. It doesn't even need to be like pushed anywhere. It just automatically is tracked.
He was also curious if there's just a command line too for it. I don't know.
I don't believe there is. We do have the integrated terminal, which I'll show in a bit, and I think that is, that is maybe something. Honestly, you'll see.
Feature request.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I've got GitHub Desktop you'll see in my taskbar, and we do tell people like, we're not going to be the perfect tool for everything. And so we want you to be happy as a developer. And sometimes that means recommending a different tool for specific jobs. So for instance, we have Git support, but sometimes, for more advanced, working on things, sometimes the GitHub app is going to be better.
Yeah, I use WinMerge on Windows, so.
There you go, so. Yep.
Okay, another question that came in. I know that you were talking about like a .NET Conf, there was a lot of gRPC stuff. John was asking kind of status of, he was asking specifically with IIS, which I don't know if that's actually a thing or not, but just kind of like our gRPC all up, maybe you could talk about.
gRPC is complicated, and we just had, so to get the full story, because I will probably mess it up, but if you go to the community stand-ups, and we had a show just Tuesday, and James Newton King answered specific questions on iOS support for gRPC. I was hosting the show and fielding questions at the time, and I didn't totally catch the answer. The issues are that iOS has there's a specific workaround written up in the docs. So like for docs, gRPC, Mac OS, there's specific things that you need to do, and we do show you workarounds in there for Mac OS. But it requires some more advanced work in order to get it going, and it has to do, as I understand, at a deeper level at integrating with .NET integrating with Mac OS. And I believe people don't want to point fingers, but I think people were complaining about that there were some things about how Mac OS networking handled things.
So probably good to go check out that link. I'll put that link I put it into the announcement so you can check that out.
Yeah, last question. Here's the specific, if you look in here, there's a note, and it's
there you go.
This is it. It's TLS, and Mac OS doesn't support gRPC with TLS. So you can get it to work, but you actually have to go through and do some specific, monkeying around stuff. Yeah.
Last question from Jay, and then we'll continue on here. Was, when there's new releases of Visual Studio, you show the roadmap page and you show the other stuff. Like, how does the documentation work like with that? Is like everything up to date at the same time? Obviously, there's different SDK shipping at different times from the other parts of the IDE.
Yeah. So we have some things that auto-generate things for so we do release notes, and so like for instance, I helped on the latest release notes. Partly I wrote up some of the stuff about the terminal and stuff, right? So these are part of our release. These go out the day of the release. They include what we're doing. We also review docs. So say we have Blazor WebAssembly coming out in May, and I've been having conversations with the docs team and with Dan Roth about, what are the top tutorials and things that we need to have updated. So we do consider it, it's part of the release. That being said, there are tons of docs, and we may not get everything, or we may have to lower priorities on some. But definitely roadmap and release notes the top level docs we consider just part of the release.
Cool. All right, that's it for me.
All right, let me get back in. I got to speed up even more. Okay, let me see. Those are notes I'd copied from something else. Yeah, I'm going to skip over some of this because it's just kind of .NET related stuff. And I want to go instead to this. So yeah, what we think about for, as part of the .NET experience, there is full support for Roslyn, NuGet package management. And then, we've really put effort into the ASP.NET Core experience. So that includes, Razor pages, Blazor, all the kind of scaffolding and templates. For Xamarin, I'm sure people on this call or people at this meetup have done mobile development, and you're familiar with what we've been doing with Xamarin. With Mac OS, but that's definitely a focus. Unity is pretty cool. We have a lot of people using Unity, including a lot of new developers that get into development from Unity and use Visual Studio for Mac. And so we have some really cool features. I'll talk about more of those in a bit. Cloud development, we have support for Docker. I think one of the key things is Azure or Azure Functions. And we had a cool demo at our recent Visual Studio for Mac refresh event, February 24th, and Jeff Holland dug into this. I love watching him talk, and it's really cool what you can do with functions. So it's support for that, including with 8.5 we ship support for functions functions v3. All right, let's go into some deep dives and stuff. I'll confess for this, sometimes PowerPoint gives me these design suggestions and I just can't help myself. And some of them don't even make any sense, and I love them even more. So some of the following slides have nonsensical designs. They're pretty, but they don't make any sense. So the project templates, that's something where, like I mentioned, I'll just kind of quickly show if I do a file new project. And I'm curious how many people are doing ASP.NET Core development. I know this is mostly a mobile meetup, but sometimes there's kind of a crossover. So I don't know if people can say that in chat or whatever, but that's definitely something we're interested in hearing about, is how much if people are doing a little of both or what they're working on. So you'll see here we've got support for, this is Razor pages, then Blazor Server, and then here are those Angular, React, and then gRPC service. So that's kind of the other neat thing here is that they have support also with authentication. So I'll actually show one that I spun up just before, and that is an Angular app with authentication. And the reason I want to point that out is that's actually pretty nice as a developer to have that. And the reason is authenticating an API is kind of complex. So here we've got an API, we've got API authorization. It also works with, this is working with Identity Server. And so it handles the server side, client side authentication. So once somebody is logged in, there's tokens being passed around and magical voodoo things happen that keep my site safe, and they're reviewed by people that understand all the different versions of OpenID and OAuth and all that. And then this also includes the integration here with Identity Server. And so if you do want to more deeply customize it, you can. So I just want to point that out, is don't write your own authentication ever. and this is a great place where, this could save you some time, but also keep your application a lot more secure. Scaffolding. So this is a cool thing, and I believe I can do that in here. Is I can just go in now and I can right click and I can say add new scaffolding. And then I can just, so we have support for both Razor pages and MVC, including with Entity Framework. This was one of those tutorials I mentioned where before we had, you would go through, create a project, and then you would have to go through and manually add a bunch of stuff in. And now this actually, in addition to to writing stuff for you, it actually will go through. I don't have a custom class, but it actually pulls in NuGet packages, sets up tooling, modifies some other stuff in your project for you. So it's doing some significant amount of work there for you.
And we did get some, I did a survey, which is thumbs up an announcement, basically. So we did get a bunch of ASP.NET developers in the room,
cool.
So you're good to go, yeah. I think there's a pretty healthy crossover in the world of .NET.
Yeah, you can't, it's pretty hard to just do one thing as a developer. And also, that's part of the fun of this job as a developer anyhow, right? Is you get to do more than one thing. Okay, Blazor Server, so I mentioned we just shipped that. That also includes authentication, includes editor and debugger support. If let's see if I already have a Blazor server. I think I do. Let's Blazor server. You can see one there, Blazor server for Dan, and that was one where I was pair programming with Dan on something. So here, this is support including debugging. It has support for editing Razor pages. So that is nice, and set a breakpoint, run it, and go through and all that. So, and it also includes support for authentication as well. And okay, Xamarin. So these are some things that have been shipped recently. Some ones that I want to call out, and then I'll point you to a blog post where you can go more deeply into this. I'm not a Xamarin developer. I'm an aspiring Xamarin developer, so yeah, I don't want to pretend. Oh, and look at that. I made an ugly slide. I made a pretty slide, and I didn't delete my ugly slide. So just pretend like you didn't see the ugly slide. So support for multi-target reload. So in the instance where you're doing hot reload and you've got, say, iOS and an Android emulator attached, it can do hot reload on both. So that was an 8.5. That looks better, by the way. I think I have an. It's coming up now. I think in here, there it is. It's an animated GIF. So the idea there is, live or the hot reloading both of them at the same time. So that is cool, or all three actually. Another thing is support for a document outline, and that's actually over on the left. So this was a case where using the automatic design suggestion actually failed me. So that was all in the 8.5 release, and Pierce did a blog post that actually came out today on that. So that includes information about what's in there. So it includes the hot reload. It includes the Android apply changes, some other kind of neat stuff on startup performance, etc. So as many mobile developers are here, I recommend going and reading Pierce's great words on that. And I think he may have shown some of that also in the community stand-up that was this week. A ton of stuff on Unity. So Unity has some of the top things there are support for things like Roslyn diagnostics. Those Roslyn diagnostics also, we just open source those. So that's pretty cool. And then, a lot of things, including some kind of advanced things like support for pointers in the debugger, shader code. So, a lot going on there. We had a full session on Unity as well at the refresh event, February 24th, if you want to see more. And there's also a blog post from Abdullah on our team who, goes into these in more detail. So, so there's more information there, including going through here. This talks about how these are they're open source, and you can read more about the open source project or process. So cool. All right. Another thing more recently is UI updates. So I mentioned, the idea that as we're building an integrated application, this gives us the ability to build a better experience to work that's more accessible. So as an example here, we integrate with high contrast mode. So when you go into your Mac OS preferences and say increase contrast, then we automatically pick that up. We went through a kind of major effort to focus on accessibility recently. I think that was in the 8.4 release. And so as part of what we did there is we looked at contrast, and we also looked at places where some of the icons didn't change for different states. So say, for instance, we would go from a green circle to a red circle. Well, for someone that's got color blindness, they're not actually going to be able to see that change. So you'll see, this kind of band on the left, those are showing the old palette in light and dark mode. Then for the for the standard now, that's kind of the middle strip there. We've gone to a higher contrast just by default. So of course this makes it easier for people that are vision impaired, but it also makes it easier for me as I'm tired at the end of the day. I don't have to squint and look at these tiny contrast changes. And then finally, you'll see over on the right that pair in light and dark mode. That shows what those look like in higher contrast mode. So, I'm just showing that, but there's support for some other things included, like voiceover support. So you can actually go through and navigate the application, and it'll read all the menus to you and tab through, and it uses all the standard Mac OS accessibility. All right, so that is the past. That's all the stuff that we have done. I want to show some of the future things that we are looking at. You can start looking at some of these now if you jump to the feature previews. So you can jump inside of Mac OS. You can go here and you can say check for updates. I have a couple that you won't see because we dog food pretty heavily at Microsoft. But so there's preview, and then there's also there's stable and preview. And so if you want to go to preview, you can start checking some of these out. And you may hit some rough edges, which is nice for us to get the bug reports. But if you need to go back to stable, you can just switch back to stable, and it'll do a pretty quick reinstall, and it just switches you back over to stable. All right, so one of the things, and at this point, I don't have, this is still being developed, so this is a PowerPoint demo for you, but this is gRPC and OpenAPI support. So what we're working on here, these are clients. These are generated clients for you for gRPC and OpenAPI. You may know OpenAPI as the previous name Swagger, which is a much cooler name, but for some reason they went with a more boring name of OpenAPI. So in this case, if somebody defines an API that you want to call into, then you can point at it, and you can either give it a URL or a file, and then you can set some other settings on it, and we'll generate a client for you. And this generated client, you don't actually want to edit that code because you want to be able to regenerate that client later if the API spec changes. But what's nice with this is then you can just say something like client dot, get users or something, and it'll call over and it handles all the API. It understands it understands all the things that are supported. It understands the required parameters, and it can, handle deserialization and stuff. So those are things in the works for 8.6. There are some gRPC things, as I mentioned. There's and it came up in that question. There are some gRPC issues on VS or just on Mac OS in general, and so that there are some things that are still being worked on. But definitely both. And especially OpenAPI is one that's, that's very baked, and that is something where, that'd be easier to play with. So, all right, so this is just showing then once you've created those, it'll list all of those, and you can go through and say, you can add another, or you can refresh, and it'll just go and ping the service endpoint and update it. All right, Blazor. This also is still being developed from a UI perspective, but they are building support for both the templates and also full editing, debugging, and all that. So that is being built now, and the plan is for that to ship along with Blazor release when Blazor WebAssembly ships in May. All right, here's one that I like. I've been playing with this a ton lately. So this is the integrated terminal. What's really cool with this is there was this Xterm JS that is used in VS Code, and it is a JavaScript console emulator thing. And Miguel, my understanding is Miguel ported that over to a native Mac OS thing in C#, and then that was used in this. Some really cool things that this supports is sensible defaults. So when you pop it open, it's going to, put you in the current working directory. It's going to understand the context of what's going on. Integrated search. So this is search of your, everything in your console history, and so that's handy. It uses the command history, and because it's integrated in with the Mac OS console, let's say you've got the existing console open for a while, you're typing a bunch of commands, then you switch over into Mac OS, and you want to reuse a previous command, you just hit the up arrow, and your history will be included. And then if you go back over into the Mac OS, say iTerm, it'll be there still. So those are kept, it's the same command history. Other support for multiple instances, localization, themes, and fonts. And so as an example, let's go in and check it out. So here I've got, let's actually switch over to a different. And I'm curious if people want to answer on here, if anyone is using the previews and has started using the terminal, if anyone's played with it and run into anything or likes it or has feedback. So, I mean, it's nice because I can do things like get status, and I've got full color code support. There are some get commands that are just easy to do from the console, and so that's handy to have there. Let's add in another one. Let's dock it. Now let's say in this one, I just want to, instead of, I've got my Z shell running, let's say I want to do bash instead, so I can pop that up. Let's do another one, and we'll dock that one, and we'll say, let's do PowerShell, right? So I don't know, help. I'm not that great at PowerShell, so. But here's my PowerShell help, so I could learn it. You'll notice in here, this is all kind of wacky. This is my custom Z shell because I'm using my Z shell, and I've got some custom themes on there. This is what it'll look like just kind of by default. Is if I go, which is to see, I've got a lot of them open. If I go ZSH-F, this shows you just the basic. So there's my kind of oops, old habits die hard. So I still have colorization support, or get stats. I've definitely forgotten to type, right? So it is still colorified. It's just that some of the other Z shell and my Z shell terminal support, you can do more customization. So this I've got Powerline fonts installed. And you can customize. I've got, in order to get Powerline support, that Powerline is these kind of funky, all these graphical looking things. And to get that, we have support in here for your terminal pad contents. And so terminal pad, you can go through and pick any. I've got Cascadia Code Powerline font. There are some other Powerline fonts available just built into Mac OS, so you can pick any of those. So you don't have to, but if you do want to nerd out on your terminal, you definitely can. And then like in this, I don't know, I don't know what kind of, see, look here, I did a FFmpeg thing yesterday, converting a movie to a GIF. I apparently typed it several times trying to get it right? So there I installed FFmpeg. This was yesterday, right? So it's got access to the full terminal history. So I don't know how fun it is to play with a terminal, but I'm having a lot of fun actually as a developer. I did a Twitch stream over the weekend. Well, I've done a few. I did one with Project Thai, which is a new thing that they're building, the .NET team is building for microservice orchestration. And with Docker and Kubernetes, you're typing a ton of commands. And so I just did it all right inside the IDE. And then this past Friday, I did the Angular Tour of Heroes, which is this thing where you go through and you build a hero tracker, and it lists a bunch of different heroes. And so I did that, and with that also, you're doing a lot of scaffolding commands, and so that was great to do. And this is an example of an Angular scaffolding command there. Although I guess here, maybe if I go back one, there it is. There it is. So ng generate component, and then I built an employee details component, and then it writes it out. So. There's also there's one coming for Visual Studio for Windows, and they're due out at about the same time. So that's coming in 8.6, and you can install it and play with it today. All right, let me see, what else do I have? Xamarin, so some stuff coming up with Xamarin, and this was to see see this in depth. You'll want to watch Pierce's demos from the stand-up. That was last Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. And so some of the cool things he showed off. One thing is he showed that you can now just, instead of AXML, you can just do XML. And when you do that, you get the standard XAML or XML editor, which can include things like, better support for things like colors, inline colors and stuff. But some cool new things. Android layout diagnostics. So the idea here is it actually is, understanding if a resource is available, or and also, so in addition to some kind of things that we will look at your code and try and figure out, there's also rule sets that you can set for your team. And you can say, nope, this is the way we do things. So almost kind of like the editor config I was talking about earlier, you can do the same sort of thing here, where you can make policy definitions and they'll apply to others on your team. And then one really neat new feature is IntelliCode. So IntelliCode is something where we actually use machine learning. We scan source code, publicly available source code. So like on GitHub, and I believe we scan like internal code and stuff, and we'll look and we'll say, okay, when you start typing Android : these are the top things you'll most likely type. And then if you type layout width, then the next thing you'll probably do is you'll, say define a value. And so you can actually just kind of tab, and it's going to make some pretty good guesses for you. Maybe as good as if you just, like went to Stack Overflow and copy pasted code. So, so this is really neat. And then we're looking at how we can continue to integrate this in with other parts of Visual Studio for Mac. So if that's interesting to you or important to you, let us know, and let us know which kind of editors support you would most like to use IntelliCode with. So, all right. So that is my main stuff. I'm going into wrap up mode now. So what we talked about was, what we see Visual Studio for Mac as a product. We looked at the release history going back over the past year, including our latest release in January and our 8.6 that's in preview. And then we did some feature deep dives, including some things like Blazor and ASP.NET Core, application support recently, and in 8.6 we looked at some things like the terminal, Xamarin support, and then of course talking about Blazor upcoming. So some things I recommend for you to do, your homework as it were. One thing is check out the Visual Studio for Mac refresh event. So we had this in February. This was a full day. James talked about the Xamarin event, which I'm sure you watched and took notes on. If you missed the Visual Studio for Mac refresh event, that was a similar kind of thing. That was a full day, and we went, in depth, and we had sessions presented, like a Blazor session from Dan Roth and Kendra, which was amazing. We had, it was a who's who of great people, great .NET PMs talking about stuff, including James and Maddie were on for the Xamarin session. And then we had a really great wrap up at the end of the day, which was tips and tricks for productivity from Kendra and Michaela, and some really cool stuff there, including just, tons of editor shortcuts and block select and all kinds of stuff, which, by the way, if you didn't know, block select is just built in, right? So if I wanted to do something like, app dot, I can do option select, right? So I can do, I don't know how much I can mess up this code, but I'll do click there and I'll hold down option, and then I can just select a bunch of code. Then I'll hit backspace and create some new commands that will not work. But anyhow, that's a handy thing, especially if you want to add in, bulk comments or something. And you can also do, you can hold down option and click, and I can create here. I think I'm doing this right. I can click and create multiple. And I forget I'm doing that incorrect right now, but we do have multi-caret support. So anyhow, that was all covered more eloquently by Kendra and Michaela at the end of the day. I showed you about running the previews. It's not the exact same experience as Visual Studio for Windows, in which you can have side-by-side, but you can switch between channels relatively quickly. So I go between preview, internal preview, and stable, maybe a couple of times a day. And it's pretty quick, smooth install for that. All right, to get a hold of us, you can always ping Visual Studio Mac. I hope you follow us also. We're working to put out good information there. And then also, people are regularly saying like, hey, I thought I saw an issue. What do you think about this? And we'll say, hey, we fixed your issue. Thank you. And so that's going on at Visual Studio Mac. And then the product feedback, you can send that to developercommunity.visualstudio.com. We have an AKAMS that's kind of a little slightly shorter, but either of those are the exact same thing. And you can both log problems, and then you can put in feature requests, and those really, really help us. They're kind of the main thing we use to decide what we're going to work on next. Anytime someone says, I think we should do something, it comes down to, well, does the community care? Are users, hitting this issue, or users asking for it? So that's really helpful if you can give us that information. Also, if you use Visual Studio for Mac and it prompts you to fill out a survey, it's kind of very discreet, and it only pops up certain times, and if you tell it to go away, it'll never come back. But if you do fill it out, it's really, really helpful to us. We spend a ton of time going through trying to understand, what are people looking for and what we can do next. So, all right. Do we have any more questions?
That's a good question. There's a few Xamarin questions. I just sort of answered them one off.
Thank you.
Mostly,
I'd be happy to make up incorrect answers, but I think yours are probably going to be better.
So some people said, Samir said he's not developing web right now, but mobile web dev may increase after Blazor is released. So
that's a huge point. Yeah, if people don't know that too, Blazor PWA is really an interesting thing. And so what that's allowing you to do is build a web application, and then it actually installs offline support. So that includes things like it downloads files, and it has service workers that can reconnect to the server later. You can do push notifications and all that. So I know all those features are old news to you as mobile developers, but it is nice to be able to build one application. If you're building a mostly web application and you want to add in more advanced features, doing Blazor support with PWA is something that's pretty exciting to me.
We got two more questions coming in, rolling in. So first is from Jay again. He said, "Where did you get that T-shirt?"
Where did I get it? I think I got it at like Build.
Is that not
a few years ago? Yeah,
.NET Foundation store?
I think it is available on the .NET Foundation store.
Yeah. No, it's not.
It's not.
I think the old one it used to be.
Yeah. So that's so now that I'm not on the .NET Foundation anymore, I say bug the .NET Foundation to fix that for you. There was an old store, and we switched over to a newer store, and we have to it takes manual work to make old inventory available in the new one, and it's kind of in between. So.
If you don't know about the .NET Foundation store, I'll put a link in here actually, so you can kind of get to it. Surprisingly, the T-shirts and everything are pretty cheap, like $12, and you can get monkeys, you can get stickers. I'll put a little announcement in here so you can see a link here, which is cool. There you go. Boop. Not bad. I just usually Google .NET Foundation store. It comes up.
Yeah, you can also
that one.
Too.
Oh, that one goes to the right place now. Good. So there you go. So Hector M asks, I actually know this answer, but I'll see if you know this answer. It says, when will Xcode 11.4 hit RTM?
Yeah, why don't you take that one and I'll take the next one.
So this is great because if you go into the release notes for Visual Studio for Mac.
Oh, that's right. That's where I've seen that.
Literally yesterday, version 8.5.2 ships official support. No, sorry, 8.5.1, which was April 1st. So it's actually built in. So it's already there. I just typed in release notes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's already in there. So you're good to go, Hector. There was a actually fun part about this. You were talking about the channels in Visual Studio for Mac. Now I log into my Gmail account, my normal Microsoft account. So my machine is just mine. And there was a public Xcode 11.4 public preview actually, and that's what was tested. So 8.5.1 Visual Studio for Mac, you're good to go. Yep. Okay, so next question. So Boyd says, great presentations. David would like some hoodies. We need to ask them there. Yes, Hector, you don't need the preview anymore. You can just get the stable channel and you should be good to go. Greg, general question. How is the remote working out for Microsoft in general? That's a good question. I think these times are good.
It is. So it's kind of funny, and I may be one of the least qualified to answer because I've worked remote for Microsoft for 10 years. So in some ways, it's business as usual. However, I have heard other people say this, and I have to say for myself, these are not normal times. I've got a family of 5 that's home all day, every day. Today was trying to figure out what's our next kind of, do we need to shop for more food and stuff? So it's distracting too, right? But it has not been as huge a shift for me as for other people. I will say in some ways there have been some positives to it. I've seen some people say, it's encouraging more, written communication, which means now there's a record, and it's encouraging some more kind of asynchronous communication. Instead of waiting for a time you can get everyone together for a meeting, you create an issue or you create an email, and so that can be good. We've also had one thing that I think is really positive is in DevDiv. Amanda Silver, who's our boss's boss, she created a breakfast club. And so every morning from 8 to 8:15, totally optional. I show up maybe once a week, and people just have coffee and talk about whatever. And sometimes it's Barry Doran's, making jokes, and sometimes it's people talking about, their favorite cooking. It's just a social time. But as a remote, that's actually been kind of nice for me. I feel more connected in some ways than I did before. So, what do you think, James?
Yeah, I mean, the fascinating part, I guess, for me too, is that I consider myself mostly a remote Redmond employee because from my perspective, I've been mostly in. Let me see if I can actually change this. Can I change this? Hold on. I think I can. It'd be cool if I could do both of us. Nope.
So I just switched.
Oh, there you go. The teams. Oh, I see now. Yeah. You're good. That's funny.
Yeah.
That's
funny. Now you're big and I'm tiny, right?
There you go. So I think from my perspective, the fascinating part for me is like most of the Xamarin team is based out of Boston. We do have some employees in Redmond, but also a lot of people are just completely remote. Like Xamarin, we had employees in like 14, 15 countries, right? Like Pierce is in Utah, Maddie's in Boston, Jamie's in New York. Just from the PM, David's in St. Louis. So most of the PMs that I work, also I guess John Douglas is in John Douglas is in Utah, and then John Dick is in Redmond. So these are people I work with. Matt Leibowitz is in South Africa. So everyone is like all over the place, right? Which I think was really beneficial. But that being said, I still think that there's the stuff that you talk about. It's not the normal, right? Like my wife is working from home, so we're moving around offices and we're changing stuff. And what does lunch look like? And we didn't eat lunch every single day together for the last 4 years that we've been to 5 years that we've been together, right? What does our anniversary look like? What are those things? But like I'm alive, healthy. I think those are the most important things. And checking in with our families. We do some things that are fun. This is my pro tips, not Microsoft related, but similar to like what Amanda Silver did with those morning things. Is we set one up on the weekend with my sister. So we call for an hour. We do a happy hour at 5 o'clock, have a beer, a glass of wine, talk about life. And then Sunday, we set up another meeting with our friends in San Francisco, Craig, who's now on the dual screen team at Microsoft. He was longtime Xamarin and Docs and things like that. And we just sort of have breakfast on Sunday, brunch together, which is fun. And we've been trying to outdo each other, which is quite fun. But besides that, yeah, it's the aspects outside of work, because luckily like Teams is great. Like I think Teams is fantastic for meetings, and the Xamarin Teams uses both Teams and Slack, so we use both tools there. Yeah. So, and I'm excited that Microsoft announced a bunch of Samir in the chat who works at Microsoft too, is saying that the New York teams are starting to hopefully try to use Teams. I know we just started a new teacher program, and I'm curious to see how what we're at today sort of pushes companies that didn't think they could be remote work first could be good. And then also like how it'll change some of the technology, because I'm sure like however like Zoom and Teams and Google Hangouts, like all the streaming technologies or collaboration tools, they're all sort of probably changing pace right now based on how people are using their tools. It's very fascinating.
Yep. Yeah, I think, it's been fortunate for Microsoft that we've been transitioning to a cloud native company. We haven't fully jumped in though. There are a lot of people that'll say, hey, let's talk next time you're in Redmond, or let's, and they'll wait for, or I'll go to Redmond and they'll say, oh, hey, good to see you. I should have told you, we had this meeting last week and we decided that, or whatever, right? And so this is, I think, forcing more people to think more distributed and kind of make the more complete transition. And like you said, I hope that, as a potential positive of this for companies to become more distributed, and in some ways, like consider remote hires. Like Xamarin has this incredible team because it's been able to hire worldwide, right? And I would love for more companies to be able to do that. So
yeah, I hope so too. I think that'd be really great, because now if a company didn't think that it works based on how it's going at their company right now, they might be like, oh, you know what, maybe we should. And yeah, it's like, you've been remote forever, so which is good. So, but I think luckily it's really about keeping those connections. So making sure your team is syncing and doing things like that, but don't have too many meetings. That's the problem, is make sure your entire calendar is not meetings, because that's bad too. That's my life, but
yeah, I love meetings where I've had a few lately where people say like, hey, do we have anything to cover? Let's cancel this one. Or get partway in and say, are we good? We're good. And they wrap up, 15 minutes in. It's like, that's great.
Yeah. Cool. I don't see anything else coming in. What I will do is, if you came in off of the meetup.com page, I'll create a survey probably tomorrow just to see what everyone sort of thought about this experience using the Teams live events. I'll be fascinated if people were having problems getting in or not, because I know we tested it a bunch and it seemed to work really well. If you had an existing account, or if you had no account at all, but somewhere in between trying to sign up, maybe, I don't know how that works. But be interested there. Some good Q&A, so I appreciate that. And yeah, we'll try to do more of these. Definitely hit us up on the meetup.com page. But I'll send out that survey just to see, like, was this good? Would it be better to do something else? Or, just how was the quality too? So be interested about that. So cool. I think that's it. Anything else from you, John?
Nothing for me. Thank you so much for the invite. This was fun.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I will also send a recap out with the slide deck and any slides. Actually, John will do that. He'll post in the comments on the Meetup page. I'm going to make him do it.
Okay.
So you can grab anything that he was talking about. And if I do get this recording somehow, I will put it somewhere and we'll figure out how to get it to everyone. Well, thanks everyone. Stay safe, be healthy. And thanks for coming and hanging out with us for the last hour and a half. So I appreciate it. And thank you, John, for taking some time out of your afternoon. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Bye, everyone.